The dog froze before I could stop myself. Her ears lifted, tail locked, nose slicing through the dark like it had found a line no one else could see. We were 3 steps from the maintenance tunnel when the radio cracked once and went dead. Not static, not interference. Dead. No birds, no wind, just the low mechanical hum of generators buried deep under concrete. I tightened my grip on the leash and felt the tremor run straight up my arm. This was not fear. This was memory. I had felt it years ago, standing behind yellow tape while my mother stared at a folded flag, her hands shaking but her face empty. The same silence. The same pressure behind my eyes. I dropped to a knee, pressed my forehead against the dog's vest, and whispered her name. Ranger did not turn. She was locked onto something I could not see yet, the kind of danger that finishes its work before alarms ever get the chance to scream. Above us, people laughed. A forklift clanged. Life kept moving like nothing was wrong. I thought of my father then. The last voicemail I never deleted. The promise I made when they flew her home. Ranger leaned forward, muscles tight. That was my answer. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I am Elena Brooks. I grew up on the east side of Hollis Ridge, West Virginia, a place where the fire station siren doubles as the town news. You always knew when something bad happened because the flags went to half-staff before anyone said a word. My father, Chief Petty Officer Megan Brooks, wore the Navy SEAL trident like it was part of her skin. She did not talk much about work. She did not need to. You could see it in how she stood in doorways, how she scanned rooms without thinking, how she hugged like she might not get another chance. In 2011, she was killed overseas during a clearance operation that went wrong. Bad intelligence. A building already wired to fail. The reports used words like heroic and necessary. They sounded finished. What they did not say was that she walked in knowing the risk and still went first. She did her job. She did not come home. I did not enlist because I wanted to be her. I enlisted because after the funeral, after the casseroles stopped showing up and the house went quiet, the silence started doing damage. Silence fills space if you let it. It grows teeth. I needed something that demanded attention, something that did not let your mind wander into places it could not survive. I made it through basic and selection by keeping my head down and my mouth shut. I learned early that grief looks like weakness to people who have never carried it. I did not correct them. Military working dogs found me, not the other way around. I liked that the work was honest. Dogs do not care about your past. They care about consistency. I learned to read what never gets said out loud. A pause in movement, a shift in breathing. Trust is not given, it is built piece by piece, mistake by mistake. Ranger was not my first dog, but she was the first one who carried damage that mirrored my own. She had lost her handler during a stateside training accident when an improvised explosive device went off during a convoy sweep. After that, she shut down, would not track, would not commit. She did everything halfway, like she was afraid of finishing the job and losing someone again. People wrote her off as unreliable. I recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same one I saw in the mirror some mornings. We rebuilt slowly. No shortcuts, no forcing it. Just repetition and patience. Some days she made progress. Some days she refused to leave the kennel. I stayed anyway. That mattered more than commands. By the time she leaned into the leash instead of away from it, we were already bonded in a way paperwork does not capture. In 2016, I was assigned to Redstone Spur Training Annex. It was the kind of installation most people never notice. No famous landmarks, no air shows. Just fences, badges, and routines that never change unless something has gone wrong. That was the point. Our job was prevention. If we did our work right, nothing happened. No headlines, no medals. Just people going home without knowing how close they came to not doing that. When intelligence flagged a potential coordinated attack window tied to a supply contractor rotation, it came through quietly. No alarms, no all-hands briefing. Just a few lines in a report and a shift in posture from the people who knew what to look for. Ranger and I were added to perimeter sweeps and infrastructure checks. It was framed as precautionary. It always is. But there was a weight to it that sat wrong in my chest. The timing felt off. The details did not line up cleanly. Too many small things brushing past each other without touching. I logged what I saw. A delivery arriving earlier than scheduled. A badge that took 2 scans when it should have taken 1. A contractor who kept his hands buried in his pockets and his eyes off faces. None of it rose to the level of action by itself. Together, it formed a picture I did not like. Ranger picked up on it before I did. Her behavior shifted. She hesitated on easy drills and overperformed on hard ones. That inconsistency bothered me more than outright failure. Dogs do not lie, but they remember. The night everything came together was not supposed to be dramatic. It was a routine sweep, the kind you do on muscle memory while thinking about nothing at all. Those are the nights that kill people. Complacency wears the uniform better than any enemy ever has. I clipped Ranger's leash, checked her vest, and told myself it was just another pass through quiet corridors and dark corners. I was wrong. The warning signs never arrived like a siren. They came in pieces so small they were easy to ignore if you wanted to. A badge that scanned twice before the light went green. A delivery truck that showed up early with paperwork that looked right until you actually read it. A contractor who spoke when spoken to but never met anyone's eyes, like eye contact itself might give him away. None of it justified stopping operations. None of it triggered alarms, but together it felt like standing under a ceiling you knew was going to collapse. You just did not know which second it would give way. Ranger felt it before I let myself admit it. Earlier that week, she hesitated on drills she had run clean 100 times, then executed complex searches with a precision that bordered on obsessive. That kind of inconsistency scares handlers more than outright failure. Failure has reasons. This was memory. Dogs do not lie, but they do remember everything that ever hurt them. Ranger was remembering something, and she did not like the direction it was pointing. I brought it up to Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan during shift change. I did not dramatize it. I never do. I just laid out what I had logged and what Ranger had shown me. Claire listened without interrupting, her eyes on the notes, not my face. She had buried friends. You could see it in the way she let silence stretch instead of filling it with reassurance. When I finished, she nodded once and logged it. No promises. No speeches. Just acknowledgement. That mattered. Instincts only work if someone above you is willing to respect them. The orders that followed stayed deliberately vague. Heightened awareness. Limited disruption. Maintain routine. Translation was simple. Do your job without scaring anyone who does not need to be scared yet. That line is thin when your partner has 4 legs and senses things you cannot explain in a briefing room. You either trust them or you do not. I trusted Ranger. That meant living with doubt. I stopped taking my boots off at night. Ranger stopped sleeping through the dark. She would lift her head at sounds I could not place, then settle again without relaxing. The radio traffic grew thin, then thinner. Not dead, just quiet in a way that felt intentional. When the night shift took over and nothing unusual was reported, the pressure in my chest did not ease. It tightened. Timing matters. Silence can be louder than noise if you know how to listen. As we moved deeper into the service corridors, the air changed. It was subtle. A difference in smell that sat wrong in the back of my throat. Ranger slowed, her body low but controlled, every step deliberate. I thought of my father then, teaching me how to pay attention without staring. She used to say danger announces itself if you are patient enough to hear it. People think that means waiting. It does not. It means noticing before you are told to. Ranger stopped near the maintenance tunnel and planted her feet. No growl. No bark. Just stillness. The kind that pulls everything else into it. I felt the moment stretch thin, the way it does right before something irreversible happens. This was the point where procedure wanted confirmation. Screens. Cameras. Another pass. This was also the point where hesitation gets written into casualty reports. I keyed the radio and heard nothing come back. No static, no echo, just absence. That was when patience ran out. Whatever was waiting on the other side of that tunnel was close enough now that delay would not make it clearer, only later. Ranger shifted her weight forward, not pulling, not straining. Ready, asking. I had a choice then, the kind no checklist prepares you for. Trust the system and hope it caught what my partner already had, or trust the dog who had rebuilt herself from loss and learned to work again anyway. I rested my hand against Ranger's shoulder and felt her steady breathing under my palm. That was all the confirmation I was going to get. I stepped forward. Command did not say no. They hesitated. That pause told me everything. They asked for confirmation, for visual proof, for something that could be pointed at on a screen and explained in a sentence. I did not have that. All I had was Ranger's posture and the way the air felt wrong in my lungs. Her body language was screaming threat, but the monitors stayed green. The camera showed concrete walls, long shadows, nothing out of place. From a distance, everything looked fine. Distance lies. Claire stepped in without raising her voice. She did not argue emotion. She repeated the facts I had logged, the inconsistencies, the timing. She did not push. She just refused to dismiss it. That was enough to slow things down, and slowing things down creates friction when people are used to smooth routines. I could hear it in the clipped replies, the careful words chosen to avoid blame. Time started to bleed away, while procedures were debated by people who were not standing where I was standing. I thought of my father then, standing between an order and a reality she could not explain fast enough to someone who had never felt it in their bones. She used to tell me later, in quiet moments, that the most dangerous place in the military is the gap between what the book says and what the ground is telling you. That gap is where people die. Standing in it feels like trying to hold back water with your hands. The radio stayed quiet. Too quiet. Ranger shifted her weight again, nails clicking once against the concrete before she stilled herself. She was waiting on me, not for permission. For commitment. Dogs know when you are stalling. They do not judge it, but they feel it. I could feel the doubt pressing in now, heavy and insistent. If I was wrong, I would shut down part of the installation, disrupt operations, and put a spotlight on myself and everyone who backed me. Careers end quietly that way. Trust erodes. People remember your name for the wrong reasons. If I was right, and I waited, people upstairs would keep moving through their routines, laughing, complaining, thinking about dinner plans. They would never know how close they came to not making it home. That is the math no one prepares you for. There is no clean answer. There is only the weight of it sitting on your chest while the seconds pass. I did not wait for permission. I moved. Ranger moved with me, perfectly in step, like the decision had already been made and she was just waiting for my body to catch up. The tunnel mouth swallowed sound. The smell hit first. Not strong enough to set off alarms, but wrong. A sharp chemical edge under old dust and damp concrete. It scraped the back of my throat. Ranger dropped into a sit without command and pawed the ground once. Her signal for buried danger, not surface, not visible, hidden. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Training fell away in that moment, replaced by a clarity that was almost calm. This was not a drill. This was not a maybe. This was real, and it was close. I keyed the radio again, voice steady, and called it in. Clear language. No qualifiers. No apology. I said what Ranger had found and where. I said we needed a hold now. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then movement. Orders shifted. Foot traffic above us was rerouted without explanation. No alarms yet. No panic. Just controlled disruption. I felt eyes on my back. Imagine them even if they were not there. I did not turn around. Doubt will eat you alive if you let it sit too long. We advanced inches at a time. Ranger worked methodically, nose low, movements precise. She was no longer hesitant. Whatever fear had lived in her since losing her handler had sharpened into focus. She marked again, stronger this time, paw landing in the same spot with intent. I followed her line to a false panel tucked behind pipes that had not been moved in years. Someone had taken the time to make it disappear into the environment. Someone who knew the building. My hand shook as I signaled for the explosive ordnance team, then steadied. Fear does that. It shows up, announces itself, then steps back if you do not let it drive. When the searchlight cut through the dark and caught the device, everything slowed. Wires. Timers. Enough yield to turn that section of the building into a grave. It was set to trigger during shift change. Maximum bodies. Minimum warning. I stepped back and let the specialists take over. That is part of knowing your role. Ranger pressed close to my leg, breath steady, eyes alert. I crouched and rested my hand against her shoulder, feeling the warmth there, the quiet strength. I whispered thanks into her fur. She did not need the words. I did. I called it in anyway. My voice stayed level, even, like I was reporting weather instead of a threat buried under concrete. I did not soften it, and I did not apologize. Ranger held her position without shifting, her weight balanced and ready, while the sweep team above us quietly rerouted foot traffic with no explanation given. People complained, someone laughed. Normal reactions to inconvenience. I felt eyes on my back even though no one was standing there. I did not turn. Turning would have meant looking for reassurance, and this was not the moment for that. We moved forward a few inches at a time, not steps. Inches. Ranger's nose traced an invisible line along the wall, then dipped lower. She marked again, sharper this time, her paw striking the same spot with intent instead of question. That was the difference. Earlier, she had hesitated. Now, she was certain. I followed the angle of her body, the direction of her focus, until I saw it. A section of wall that did not belong. A false panel tucked behind old piping, painted to match years of neglect. Whoever put it there knew the building well enough to hide in plain sight. This was not random. This was practiced. My hands shook as I raised my arm and signaled for the explosive ordnance team. I hated that shake. I accepted it anyway. Fear does not disqualify you. Losing control does. I forced my breathing slow and steady, the way I had been taught, the way my father used to do without thinking. Ranger pressed closer to my leg, not seeking comfort, just maintaining contact. She was working. So was I. When the searchlight cut through the dark and washed over the panel, the world seemed to slow down around it. Time stretches in moments like that, like it wants you to see everything before it moves again. Wires crisscrossed the cavity, tight and deliberate. A timer sat centered and calm, counting down toward a moment no one upstairs knew was coming. The yield estimate came back quiet and fast. Enough to turn the maintenance wing into a tomb. Enough to carry shock and fire through adjoining corridors. It was set for shift change. Maximum bodies. Minimum warning. Whoever planned it understood flow. Understood routine. Understood how people move when they think they are safe. I took 2 steps back and stopped. That was my line. Past that point, this was no longer my job. Knowing when to step aside is as important as knowing when to move forward. The specialist took over with a calm, that only comes from seeing too many things like this and surviving anyway. They spoke in short phrases, precise and controlled. No one rushed. Rushing kills people faster than bombs do. Ranger stayed with me, pressed against my calf, her breathing even. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for weeks eased just enough to feel. Trust is not loud, it settles. I crouched and rested my hand against her vest, feeling the solid warmth under the fabric. I whispered thanks into her fur. She did not look at me. She did not need the words. She had done exactly what she was trained to do. I needed to say them anyway. As the device was rendered safe piece by careful piece, the reality of how close it had come began to sink in. Above us, people were being guided back into their routines without ever knowing why they had been delayed. They would complain later about inefficiency, about wasted time. They would not know that a few inches and a few minutes had separated them from something permanent. That is how prevention works. It leaves no story for most people to tell. Claire came down the corridor while the team worked, her face unreadable. She did not ask me how I felt. She did not need to. She looked at Ranger first, then at the device, then back at me. She nodded once. That was it. No congratulations. No relief allowed yet. We stayed focused until the last component was removed and sealed. Only then did the adrenaline drain out of my body in a rush that made my knees weak. I leaned back against the wall and let it pass. Ranger sat beside me without command, close enough that our shoulders touched. She had not shut down. She had not frozen. She had trusted again, fully, when it mattered most. I thought about her old handler, about the moment she lost him, about how she must have learned that finishing the job could cost you someone you love. Tonight, she finished it anyway. When the all clear finally came, it was quiet. No applause, no announcement. Just a return to normal operations. I clipped Ranger's leash a little tighter and stood up, feeling the weight of what had almost happened settle somewhere deep and permanent. This was not a victory you celebrate. This was a reminder. The work matters. The silence matters. And sometimes the most important decision you make is the one you choose to stand behind when no one else can see what you see yet. The shutdown rippled outward faster than the information ever would. Gates closed, flights delayed, convoys rerouted. People grew angry before they ever felt relief, and that did not surprise me. Most people hate inconvenience more than unseen danger. They want proof of threat before they accept disruption, and prevention does not come with proof you can hold in your hand. It only comes with absence. Nothing happened. That is the success, and it never feels satisfying to anyone watching from the outside. As the explosive ordnance team worked, secondary alerts started to come in from other sectors. Not confirmations, indicators. Patterns that looked similar enough to keep everyone on edge. Possible copycat activity. Possible redundancy built into the plan. Nothing solid, but enough that no one relaxed. Ranger and I were sent back out as soon as the first threat was neutralized. There was no celebration, no pause to breathe. Just a quiet understanding that if someone was willing to try once, they might have planned for more than one failure point. Ranger worked until the pads on her paws wore thin beneath the wraps. I noticed the blood before she reacted to it. She never slowed, never broke focus. Each corridor, each access point, each stretch of concrete was another question she answered without hesitation. I kept my voice calm and steady even as it started to scrape raw. Commands grow hoarse when you have been awake too long and adrenaline has nowhere left to go. The night stretched thin, hours losing shape as we moved from place to place, guided more by instinct than clocks. Above us, operations limped forward in fragments. Some personnel were sent home early. Others were told to wait without explanation. I caught glimpses of frustration, of people checking phones and watches, irritated at the disruption. I did not blame them. I used to be one of them before I learned what quiet work looks like. Prevention does not announce itself. It just leaves people wondering why their routine got interrupted for no clear reason. Ranger finally slowed near the end, not from fear but from exhaustion. I swapped out her wraps with shaking hands and pressed my forehead briefly to hers, just long enough to ground myself again. She leaned into me, steady and present. That simple weight kept me upright when my knees wanted to fold. At 3:40 in the morning, Command finally said the words we had all been waiting for. Stand down. Not victory. Not clear. Stand down. I sat on the concrete where I was and let the tremor move through my body without fighting it. Ranger collapsed beside me, her side rising and falling fast. Job done. For a few minutes, neither of us moved. The building hummed around us like it always had, as if nothing extraordinary had almost torn through it. When the reports were written later, when timelines were reconstructed and decisions justified in careful language, my father's name surfaced in my mind without warning. The device layout, the placement, the logic behind it. Same tradecraft, same signature pattern she had warned about years ago, back when she still came home and stood in doorways scanning rooms. Whoever planned this had studied failures, not just successes. They had learned from operations that went wrong and adapted. That realization hurt more than the adrenaline crash. It meant the past was still teaching the wrong people lessons. I thought about how many times my father must have stood where I had stood, sensing something she could not fully explain, pushing back against timelines and assumptions because the ground told her something different. I wondered how many times she had made the same calculation I had made tonight. How many times she had chosen action knowing there would be no applause if she was right and severe consequences if she was wrong. The weight of that lineage settled heavy in my chest. Ranger stirred beside me and rested her head against my thigh. Even exhausted, she stayed alert, ears twitching at distant sounds. She had crossed a line tonight, not just operationally, but internally. She had trusted fully again, despite knowing what trust had cost her before. Watching her breathe, watching the tension slowly leave her frame, I understood something I had been circling for years. Courage is not the absence of fear or memory. It is the decision to move anyway, knowing exactly what could be lost. When daylight finally crept in through high windows, it did not feel like relief. It felt like continuation. Another watch ended. Another one would begin. People would return to their routines and complain about delays, about inefficiency, about wasted time. They would never know how close that time came to being their last ordinary complaint. That was fine. That is how it should be. I stood up carefully, my legs stiff and unsteady, and clipped Ranger's leash with hands that still trembled. We walked out together, past sealed doors and tired faces, carrying the quiet knowledge that the night could have ended very differently. The history behind us had not stayed buried, but it had not won either, not this time. They did not tell us right away. Truth has a way of arriving after the adrenaline fades, once everyone has slept just enough to function and the paperwork starts lining up. It came the next day in a closed room with no windows and a single screen on the wall. No uniforms from higher command. Just familiar faces and careful voices. The device, they said, matched a network tied to an older operation. Not the same people, not the same place. The same methods, the same corrections made after something had failed the first time. The failure they were talking about had a name I carried every day. It felt like someone had added weight to my body without touching me. Not anger, not shock. Weight. Like a circle that had been moving slowly for years had finally closed enough for me to see its shape. My father had walked into a building because the information told her it was clear. Someone else had studied that mistake, refined it, and tried again years later in a different place with different targets. I was not part of the ending. I was part of the interruption. That distinction mattered more than I expected it to. Ranger sat close as the briefing continued, her shoulder pressed against my leg. When the room emptied and the voices stopped, she climbed halfway into my lap without command and rested her head there. Her breathing slowed. Her body went heavy in a way it never had before. For the first time since her handler died, she slept without twitching. No sudden movements, no sharp inhales. Just sleep. Deep and unguarded. Watching that happen broke something open in my chest I had kept sealed for a long time. I realized then that she had not just been working through training and repetition. She had been waiting to finish something the right way, waiting to do the job fully again and survive it. Dogs do not talk about closure, but they feel resolution. Ranger found hers under concrete and wiring and quiet decisions made before permission arrived. I sat there longer than I needed to, one hand resting on her back, feeling the rise and fall of it. The room smelled like old coffee and dust. Somewhere outside, people were moving on with their day. I thought about how close that day had come to not existing at all, how easily it could have gone the other way if I had waited for confirmation that would never come in time. The weight shifted then, settling into something steadier. Responsibility does not get lighter. You just learn how to carry it. Claire came by later in the afternoon. No entourage. No clipboard. She leaned against the doorframe and watched Ranger sleep for a moment before speaking. She did not say congratulations. She did not ask how I was holding up. She knelt down instead and thanked Ranger first, her voice low and direct, like she was speaking to another soldier. Then she stood and looked at me. "Thank you for not waiting." That was all. She did not explain what she meant. She did not need to. Waiting is the safer choice on paper. It is the one that protects you if things go wrong. Not waiting means you own the outcome, no matter what it is. Hearing her acknowledge that mattered more than any medal ever could. Medals shine. Words like that stay. After she left, I walked Ranger outside. The air felt different in daylight. Less sharp, less heavy. We passed people who nodded or smiled without knowing why. I wondered how many times my father had walked away from scenes like this, carrying knowledge no one else needed to carry. How many times she had gone home and sat quietly, letting the weight settle before putting on a normal face for the world. I visited her grave that evening. Hollis Ridge stays quiet even when the rest of the world moves on. I brought Ranger with me. She sat when I asked and stayed when I did not. I told my father what happened, not in detail, just enough. We stopped one, not all. 1. The circle did not close the way stories want it to, with justice or revenge or finality. It closed just enough to keep something else from repeating itself that night. Ranger leaned into my leg, solid and warm. Proof that broken things can still stand watch. Proof that loss does not always get the last word. As we walked back to the truck, I understood something clearly for the first time. My father did not give her life so I could chase an ending. She gave it so someone else could keep making decisions that mattered, even when they were hard, even when no one was watching. That night did not heal old wounds. It did not erase grief. What it did was give it direction. Forward, into work, into vigilance, into the quiet understanding that sometimes honoring the dead means refusing to let their lessons be used against the living. Ranger slept the whole drive home, head resting against the door, peaceful in a way I had never seen before. I kept my eyes on the road and my hands steady on the wheel, carrying the weight with me. Not as a burden, but as a responsibility I was finally ready to accept. Life snapped back into place for everyone else with unsettling speed. Gates reopened, flights resumed. Schedules filled back in like nothing had ever threatened to tear them apart. For Ranger and me, normal never returned. It never does after nights like that. She was pulled from active rotation and sent into rehab and recovery, her paws wrapped and monitored, her workload reduced to short walks and quiet rooms. She hated it at first. Purpose leaves a hollow space when it is taken away, even temporarily. I sat through debriefs while she healed, answering the same questions over and over until they blurred together. Why did you act without confirmation? Why did you move before permission arrived? Why did you trust instinct over procedure? I gave the same answer every time. Because silence has a sound. Because waiting feels different when you know what you are listening for. Some people nodded like they understood. Some wrote notes like they did not. I did not argue. You cannot teach that kind of understanding in a briefing room. You either earn it over time or you do not. Ranger recovered slowly. The vets were careful, respectful. They treated her like what she was, a partner who had pushed past pain because the job demanded it. I visited her every chance I got, sitting on the floor beside her kennel, talking about nothing in particular. She listened the way dogs do, present without judgment. When they finally cleared her for light work, she walked a little taller. Not eager, steady. Like she had settled something inside herself. Weeks later, I took leave and drove back to Hollis Ridge. The town had not changed. Same gas station. Same quiet roads. Same cemetery tucked against a line of trees that never seemed to move, no matter how hard the wind blew. I brought Ranger with me. She stayed close, leash loose, reading the place the way she reads everything else. I knelt in front of my father's headstone and rested my hand against the cool stone. I did not give a long report. I did not need to. I told her we stopped one. Not all, just one. I told her the lessons she paid for were still being used, but not only by the wrong people. I told her her work mattered, even years later, even in ways no one would ever connect back to her name. That would have to be enough. It had to be. Ranger sat beside me when I asked and stayed when I did not. She leaned into my leg, solid and warm, her weight grounding me in a way words never could. In that moment, surrounded by quiet and memory, I understood something I had been chasing without realizing it. Broken things do not need to be fixed to be useful. They need purpose. They need trust. They need someone willing to stand with them while they remember who they are. We stayed there longer than planned. No one rushed us. The world kept turning somewhere else. When we finally stood and walked back toward the truck, I felt lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because it was finally balanced. Ranger climbed into the passenger seat and curled up, content, her breathing slow and even. As we drove away from the cemetery, I glanced at her and felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. She would stand watch again when the time came. So would I, not because we were unbroken, but because we were still willing. Sometimes that is the only qualification that matters. People ask if it felt like closure. It did not. Closure is a word civilians use when they want a clean ending, something they can point to and say it is finished. What we get instead is continuation. Another watch. Another night. Another quiet win that no one applauds and no one ever asks about. The work does not end. It just hands itself to the next set of tired eyes willing to stay alert a little longer. My father gave her life overseas doing what she believed was right. Ranger lost her handler doing the same. Nothing we did at Redstone Spur erased those losses. We did not bring anyone back. We did not rewrite the past. What we did was honor it the only way that matters in this line of work. We paid attention. We listened when something felt wrong. We acted when it would have been safer, easier, and more comfortable to wait. War dogs do not understand legacy or sacrifice the way people talk about it. They understand trust. They understand work. Ranger never needed to know my father's name to finish the job. She did not need a story or a reason beyond the one in front of her. I needed to remember that name to step forward when hesitation felt tempting. We each carried what the other could not. Somewhere that night, people went home without knowing why traffic stalled, why gates closed, or why alarms never sounded. They complained about delays and forgot about them by morning. That is how it is supposed to be. If this story stays with you, let it be for that reason. The victories you never see still matter. The nights that end quietly still count. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is stand watch and make sure nothing happens at all. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.